The criminals have access to all of the same tools that, everyone else has. And they have been able to create highly sophisticated scams. They're leveraging things such as deep fakes to really improve the way they are coming after consumers and consumer data. And it makes it extremely hard for anyone to tell the difference. So as a result, Mastercard is also, and others are leveraging that same technology, but in putting it against our different fraud solutions and our fraud tools. We know that leveraging additional insights and putting them together through things like generative AI helps make our tools not just stronger at detecting, but really strong at predicting what could be fraudulent.
Fraud is no longer just a downstream cleanup issue. It's a direct result of cyber incidents that outpace our organization structures. Siloed teams still overlook weak signals, coordinated attacks manage to get through, and losses grow across different channels. That's why banking leaders need a new strategy, one that treats fraud and cybersecurity as unified defenses, sharing intelligence, standardizing procedures, and making real-time decision-making. In this episode of Banking Transforming, we're going to explain how cyber-enabled fraud actually occurs, why traditional structures no longer work, and what it takes to stay ahead. We're also going to explore how AI is changing the entire game, looking at how attackers are scaling deception and how banks can respond with smarter profiling and faster, smoother decision-making. Now, this may all sound like a bunch of bad news, which in a way it is. However, we can feel more secure when we have people like our guest today on the podcast. Joining me today is Laura Quevedo, the Executive Vice President of Fraud and Decision Solutions at Mastercard, obviously a leader at the center of the payments resiliency marketplace, financial crime prevention, and risk decisioning. She's going to share how integrated teams and shared intelligence are changing outcomes for institutions worldwide. So for banking leaders tasked with protecting their institutions and customers in this era of converged threats, this conversation offers a practical roadmap for building truly resilient defenses. Because the question is no longer whether your fraud and cyber teams work together, but how quickly you can make that happen. So Laura, welcome to the show today. Before we get going, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. I'm Laura Quevedo, and as you said, I am with Mastercard, and I'm part of our security solutions organization. I look after our fraud, financial crime, and our decisioning solutions, and I'm really happy to be here. Happy to talk about such an important topic.
So it obviously makes sense that Mastercard is involved in the whole area of cybersecurity and fraud resilience, because obviously you're recognized worldwide as a leadership in payments, but it really takes a partnership between financial institutions, merchants, consumers, and organizations like yours to make the ecosystem even stronger. So how is your investment in cybersecurity increasing to not only support the core business, but also strengthen the broader digital payments ecosystem that banks and consumers depend on?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I'll tell you a little bit about the way we think about it at Mastercard. I mean, when you think about security, it's really critically important to embed security and trust in every layer of the digital economy, whether that be, before a transaction takes place, what we know about someone's identity, right through the entire payment chain. We've been investing since 2018. I think it's been about $11 billion worth of investment has gone into our own technology, as well as acquisitions and partnerships, really to do just that, embed security and trust in every layer of the payments ecosystem. Over the years, we have integrated with about 170 different technology partners. We are part of 50 different industry or law enforcement or regulatory associations that's really designed to help embed safety and security in the payments ecosystem. and help us to shape some of the security standards that really need to come to the forefront as we all deal with threat and cyber attacks in the ecosystem. We've recently acquired a company called Recorded Future that has some of the industry's leading threat intelligence to help us in the fight against fraud and cyber threats in the industry.
It's interesting. The innovation that Mastercard does is known worldwide, and it's very interesting because a lot of times it's in the payments space, but more and more it's getting into the cybersecurity and risk space because it's a never-ending battle. We're seeing an increase overall of cyber-enabled fraud. Can you walk us through some real-world examples how the cyber attack actually develops into fraud and what that progression actually looks like today?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the way we think about it and the way I think, we're seeing this really play out is that the cyber attack is really the first stage of any fraud that occurs. What we're seeing are things like a merchant website that's been infiltrated with malicious code that allows the criminals to steal card information. Once they steal that card information from a legitimate cardholder shopping on, a legitimate merchant site, they then take those card numbers and they can sell them on the dark web, or they can use them themselves to then commit fraud. We're also seeing things like bin attacks, where criminals are leveraging test merchants and just card information to test cards either in the authorization or the authentication stream, just to see if the card number is good. And then they go and sell it on the dark web to a criminal who will then monetize it. So we're seeing these kinds of attacks happen, and they typically start in the cyber realm.
So over the last, let's say, just 3 years, because we could go back 5, but the reality is so much has happened in the last 3 years. What has Mastercard really focused on, and how has the whole dynamic of cybersecurity and fraud changed, and your need to keep up with it with your bank partners?
So I think that what I would call out as probably the single biggest change is this realization that the more information and the more insights you have, the more effective you can be. It's critically important that in all of your fraud and behavioral tools, you're incorporating insights from all different places, whether it be from the cyber realm, from merchants, from identity information. That data is incredibly important. So bringing together data from all different parts of the ecosystem enables you to build added intelligence into your fraud tools so that you can be more proactive and find those attacks really before they've had a chance to cause a lot of damage.
More than ever, the communication within a financial institution and even within their partnership ecosystem is more important. What are some warning signs of coordinated attacks that those organizations that have siloed fraud and cyber teams could often overlook due to poor communication?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that, kind of goes back to what I was saying before about the cyber attack being kind of the first stage. If I have two very independent organizations, one looking at cyber and one looking at fraud, they will miss some of those key indicators. So, for example, the cyber team may have seen that a particular merchant is exposed in some way. Either it's been a victim, used as a coordinator of bin attacks, or it may have malicious code, and they know that information. If the fraud team knew that, then they may be able to say, hey, these cards were used at this merchant that we know has been compromised or has some, bad code. So now I'm going to apply more due diligence to the transactions that are coming through the network for those particular cards. So by missing that kind of shared intelligence, the fraud teams are going to miss key indicators that help to identify that these transactions may be bad and could be the result of a fraud attack.
So, the coordination of financial institutions with your organization is paramount. I mean, you provide them the tools while they're developing their own tools. When you're going into a financial institution today, what are the things from your playbook that you see most financial institutions really missing beyond just poor communication between the silos?
I think some of the critical things that financial institutions have to think about is, not just how they work together, but how quickly they work together and how they can work together in an automated way. So how do they readily and easily share data and share insights from one side to the other so that they can be embedded in the different fraud tools and capabilities that they may have. So it's really important that not just the communication, but the automation and the integration of data and capabilities is critically important. So being able to leverage all of that information in a real-time automated way is really an area of big focus.
So, we talk about the fact that organizations have to reevaluate their relationship between cybersecurity and fraud prevention, and that you mentioned that there's technologies and ways to actually make it so the lineup of all the data and everything they're getting can work together. What specific technologies and platforms are helping to facilitate this closer collaboration?
So that's a great question. And I had mentioned earlier how Mastercard has been investing in different types of companies and partnerships that allow us to acquire more insights, more data to help us provide stronger and more effective tools to ensure that our financial institutions can really protect themselves. One of those tools is what we call Mastercard Threat Intelligence, which is a new product that'll be coming out that really allows you to leverage really important cyber intelligence to embed in your fraud tools and capabilities. So it's a platform that provides real fraud intelligence that you can leverage for your real-time fraud detection tools.
So this is something that's just been introduced. How does that differ from what you had offered financial institutions in the past? What are the enhancements to this brand new tool that just was introduced?
I think the key to this is the different kinds of intelligence that we're able to bring to bear through this tool. We have insights on merchants that may have been compromised. We know about merchant websites that are used for card testing. We know about cards that have been sold on the dark web or have been used in other ways. Being able to take these insights and embed them into things like traditional fraud models makes them that much more intelligent and that much more effective. So that's really, the key to this added intelligence bolstering existing fraud tools.
So is this an AI driven tool, or is it work in conjunction with other tools you have at MasterCard?
It's actually intended to work in conjunction with other tools. It's added insights, added reporting, added intelligence that can be leveraged in multiple ways. It can definitely be embedded in the insights and information that you have within your own internal fraud tools or embedded in any kind of AI model. So how you use that data and how you use it for education and awareness is all critical components of your overall fraud strategy.
So organizations take advantage of this new tool and they take advantage of the other tools that MasterCard offers. What are some of the measurable impacts that happen from the standpoint of preventing fraud losses, as well as reducing the response time to emerging threats?
So we have seen that, by adding additional intelligence, we can just internally within Mastercard, for example, we can we can we have seen just by leveraging additional insights that we're pulling in from all different sources that we have been able to improve our detection tools and the tools that we're able to offer to customers by huge amounts. In some cases, as much as 300% increase in fraud detection for some of our AI models, like our decision intelligence. We've seen an increase of 20% detection in, scam attacks on certain other products, like in our financial crime area. So we know that these types of insights and intelligence really do help to identify those next gen fraud attacks and help to really improve the accuracy of our models.
It's interesting. We talk about AI all the time, and obviously, the fraudsters are increasingly using generative AI to make even more convincing scams and expanded attacks rapidly. How is MasterCard changing its risk assessment and fraud prevention strategies to fight these AI driven threats?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no secret that the criminals have access to all of the same tools that everyone else has, and they have been able to create highly sophisticated scams. They're leveraging things such as deep fakes to really improve the way they are coming after consumers and consumer data, and it makes it extremely hard for anyone to tell the difference. So by as a result, Mastercard is also and others are leveraging that same technology, but in putting it against our different fraud solutions and our fraud tools. We know that leveraging additional insights and putting them together through things like generative AI helps make our tools not just stronger at detecting, but really strong at predicting what could be fraudulent.
Yeah, that's the key is to have your have the ability to almost predict what may go wrong. And actually, when you look at financial services, AI's first application was in fraud and risk. I mean, that's where looking at
Yeah.
behavioral things, looking to reduce false positive and enhance real time fraud decisioning. Is this getting better and better with time? Are you staying ahead of the bad guys, so to speak?
Um, yes, I think we're doing a really good job of staying ahead and incorporating new technology as quickly as possible. I think we're definitely doing it as quickly as criminals, but obviously, when you think about the way criminals have really no controls around them, they
Yeah.
can use whatever data they want. They can go in any direction they want. They're not bound by regulations and they're not bound by, kind of restrictions. Within, the financial institutions and within, the banking industry, we're obviously looking very carefully at how we leverage data to make sure we're doing it in the most ethical way, but also, making sure that our technology is, safe, secure, and protects the confidentiality of transactions. So we have a little bit more, at play when it comes to how we build our products and solutions, but they're built with integrity and they're built with, all of the right protections in
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You mentioned that your new product, MTI, and that is actually shared intelligence powered by both MasterCard and MTI. Can you explain how cross institutional intelligence sharing really helps with resilience and what that looks like in practice for your banking partners?
Yeah, and that's a really good, it's a really good question. And one of the things that MasterCard talks about quite a lot, especially in industry forums, is the need for, financial institutions to share what they're seeing, share what they're experiencing. And, being able to say that, this has happened over here to this particular sector or this particular financial institution provides that kind of added insight and awareness that this is, very rarely does a fraud attack or some kind of a scam happen only in one place. So the ability to share information and provide that kind of heads up not only allows others to be aware of it, but allows others to enhance their tools and their fraud decisioning making to protect themselves in advance. So sharing insights is incredibly important and something that we encourage, in all of the industry forums that we participate in.
It's interesting when you look at fraud and risk, it's really a game of the weakest link where be it the consumer, the merchant, the financial institution, or MasterCard or one of the partner organizations, whoever's not doing their job, it really weakens the entire chain, as in an analogy there. Where are you seeing the most power capability or the biggest opportunity out there? What part of that entire chain could do better and make it so that the whole tide rises?
Yeah, so I think, what we've seen is that fraud can happen at any part of the chain, right? So the earlier in the process you can detect something, going wrong or something bad, then the better you'll be at preventing all of the downstream impacts. So whether that be at the cyber space where you're seeing these attacks happening at particular merchants, and then you can prevent cards that were being used at that merchant or fraud that occurred through that merchant is great. You may see it somewhere like in the identity space where you have criminals signing up um, for accounts that are later used fraudulently. So if you can, really invest in your detection tools and your identity tools, and you may prevent it there. So the earlier in the process you can detect it, the better off you'll be, and ultimately you'll have lower fraud losses. So early detection is definitely key.
So let's break that down a little bit. What can a consumer do to help that whole chain work better? What can consumers look out for or do on their behalf that would basically obviously help every financial institution in the country with their fraud risk assessments?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to call out because in a lot of ways, consumer is the key. And in really to be able to impact, fraud from the very beginning is really consumer education. How do you make sure that the consumer is aware of what's happening in the ecosystem? How do they protect their credentials? How do we make sure that they're not falling for scams? I mean, those are the kinds of things that we really have to focus on. So the more education, the more industry education, financial institution education, the more, public education that we can, provide, the better off we're going to be. It's also critically important to work with social media companies as well, educating consumers on how much information they're giving up about themselves on social media to help prevent, the ability of criminals to be able to create their identity or steal their identity and then leverage it later on for fraudulent opportunities.
Again, I'm going to get back to the weakest link scenario. Obviously, every financial institution has to do well because whatever financial institutions don't carry their weight, it truly impacts the entire universe. So, what are a couple things that financial institutions really need to do today to improve their capability in the overall ecosystem on fraud and risk? What do they have to improve that they're just not doing well at right now,
So
or as well as
I
they
think
could?
yeah. Well, I think, some of the things that we've been talking about is really that internal communication is one thing, right? Making sure that all of the assets that you have across your organization are actually coming together and, leveraging the insights and information they have to help identify where they may have vulnerabilities and how they close those vulnerabilities. So, just that internal collaboration is really key. Industry collaboration, again, critically important. Making sure that, you're sharing what you know, as well as, gaining information and insights from what others in the industry know will certainly help you. But the most important part is, how you implement that. It's important that you continue to invest in tools and solutions to help protect your consumers, protect your own data, and to ensure that you have protections in place to avoid fraud in the future. And I think those kinds of things are the types of things that institutions have to be focused on right now.
So Laura, your job every day you go to work, there's a new challenge out there. Your work evolves by the minute, if not by the hour of the day. What do you see coming down, looking ahead? What do you see coming down the pike that's really going to be helping in the new area of fraud prevention, cybersecurity, whether it's emerging technologies, maybe some new threat vectors or evolving best practices. What do you see happening that's going to make it so that we even get better at what we're trying to do here?
Yeah. Well, I think, in my mind, I think there's two areas that are coming that we have to be really prepared for, and we have to really, think about in terms of preparing consumers and preparing the industry. There's no doubt that scams will continue to be one of the most challenging problems that we deal with. It is, if ever you go to a conference or you go to any kind of, industry, event, I think the word scam is the word that you hear more than anything else. Scam and fraud and
Yep.
scam. And scams are going to continue to be a very difficult challenge for us, especially as AI continues to evolve and become more and more sophisticated. The scams are going to be harder and harder to detect. So I think that is one of the biggest areas that we have to think about. And when I think about scams, it's one thing about, to see consumers that are scammed into sending money to somebody they shouldn't have, right? That's definitely a big problem. That's what we're seeing today on the account to account rails, that kind of scam activity. But when you think about the sophistication of hackers and criminals today, I think we're going to see more and more cases where the old fraud events that we used to see are not really what's taking place today. What's really going to be is that consumers are going to continue to be scammed into doing things they shouldn't have done. So the transaction is real. They actually did it. It's the real credentials, the real card, the real account. But the purpose was, impacted by a scam event. So those are the kinds of challenges that
Yeah.
we're going to be dealing with. What do we do in those cases? I think that for that, what's going to be critically important is understanding, the players on either side, and also understanding behaviors. Is this what we expect to see from this consumer? So we're going to be focusing on that kind of detection kind of capability. And then I think the other area that we really have to focus on is this, kind of new emerging agentic commerce and all of the fraud challenges that will be presented through, these new ways of transaction. So I think there's going to be a lot that keeps us busy in the years to come.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember our podcast reaches out to retail bankers from organizations of all sizes, of all dimensions, and in all roles. And a lot of the people that listen to the podcast are parts of the organization that are dealing with front-facing employees, be it customer care, a teller line, a branch person, people like this. And I think it's important to remember that every line of defense is that. It's a line of defense in the whole combating against fraud and risk. And I think we have to realize that. You mentioned it earlier about the need for better customer education. We also mentioned the need for institutions to take advantage of the tools available by their Mastercard and other partners out there that provide the tools to combat risk. But it gets down to communication. It gets down to communicating with our customers and our employees about what's going on out there and how they can take a role in this. But it's also communication within our organization to make sure that we're aligned in our defense, and the communication with our solution providers that provide us the tools to do better. We've had a number of podcasts on, episodes in this podcast on information, insight, risk, and fraud. And I think it's important to continue to review these because the marketplace continues to evolve, but the importance doesn't go away of being able to defend ourselves against this.